The interview started in less than an hour when Caleb Holloway slammed on his brakes, not because of traffic, but because a little girl on the sidewalk had dropped a homemade paper airplane into the middle of the street. He watched her father rush forward without hesitation, scoop her into his arms, and laugh as if nothing else in the world mattered. For a heartbeat, Caleb smiled. Then he looked at the dashboard clock. 7:14 a.m. One missed minute could become one missed future. He eased his pickup back into motion, unaware that before the morning ended, he would be forced to choose between the future he had spent months chasing and a stranger whose name he didn't even know. Before we go any further, I'd love to know a little about you. How old are you, where are you watching from, and have you ever been in a moment where doing the right thing came with a painful cost? The air carried that crisp October chill unique to Northern Virginia. Leaves skated across the parking lot as Caleb pulled into the driveway of the small townhouse he rented. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, aging carpet, and a porch that leaned just enough to remind him he couldn't afford to fix it, but it was home. Inside, 10-year-old Nora Holloway was already dressed for school, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and a science project spread around her. "You ironed your shirt twice," she teased without looking up. "I only ironed it once." "You ironed the sleeves again." Caleb looked down and laughed quietly. "You notice everything." "I have to," she replied with a grin. "You're kind of a disaster before big days." She wasn't wrong. This interview wasn't simply another chance. It was the first serious opportunity he'd had since the logistics company where he managed regional operations collapsed 11 months earlier. Hundreds lost their jobs. Caleb walked away with a cardboard box, a severance check that disappeared too quickly, and a promise to his daughter that somehow everything would be okay. He had kept many promises. That one was getting harder every week. The refrigerator hummed louder than it should. The kitchen faucet dripped with stubborn rhythm. Bills rested in a neat stack beside the coffee maker, unopened only because he already knew what every envelope wanted from him. Nora slid something folded across the table. "Don't open it until you're in the truck." "Secret instructions?" "Nope." "Good luck charm?" She shrugged, pretending not to care. "Maybe." Caleb tucked the folded paper into the inside pocket of his navy jacket. He had bought the suit nearly 12 years earlier for a promotion ceremony. It still fit well enough, though the elbows had begun to shine with age. As they climbed into the truck, Nora looked out the passenger window. "You're going to do great today." "What makes you so sure?" "Because when people actually meet you, they always like you." Caleb wished confidence worked that way. He started the engine, dropped Nora off at school with a hug that lasted 1 second longer than usual, and turned toward downtown. The interview represented stability. Health insurance. A future where every purchase didn't require mental arithmetic. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to imagine life becoming ordinary again. He reached into his jacket pocket at a red light and unfolded Nora's note. In careful blue handwriting, it read, "No matter what happens today, you're already the bravest dad I know." Caleb smiled, folded the note carefully, and placed it back into his pocket. He had no idea those words would be tested far sooner than either of them could imagine. The traffic light turned green, but the line of cars barely moved. Caleb glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 7:48 a.m. His interview was scheduled for 8:30. If traffic cleared within the next few minutes, he would still have enough time to park, straighten his tie, and walk into the building looking composed instead of desperate. He rolled down the window slightly, letting the cool autumn air sweep through the cab. It helped quiet the anxious rhythm in his chest. He'd rehearsed every answer. Why had he left his previous employer? What kind of leader was he? How did he handle conflict? For weeks, he'd practiced in front of the bathroom mirror after Nora had gone to bed, forcing himself to sound confident even on days he barely believed his own words. A loud metallic crack shattered the morning. It came from somewhere ahead, followed almost instantly by the violent screech of twisting steel. Every car in front of him stopped. Someone shouted. Another horn blared continuously. Caleb leaned forward, trying to see beyond the SUVs blocking his view. Thin gray smoke curled into the air. An accident. People climbed out of their vehicles but remained frozen several yards away. Some lifted phones to record. Others simply stared. Without allowing himself time to think, Caleb pulled his truck onto the shoulder, switched on the hazard lights, and ran. The damaged sedan had slammed sideways into a concrete divider. The driver's side was crushed inward, the windshield fractured into a spiderweb of glass. Inside sat a woman, conscious but trapped. Blood trickled from a cut near her temple. Her breathing was fast. One arm was pinned awkwardly beneath the deployed airbag. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Caleb called. Her eyes focused on him for only a second before she nodded weakly. "My door." "I know." He grabbed the handle. It wouldn't move. Another driver hurried over. "I already called 911, the man said. "They're on the way." Caleb nodded without taking his eyes off the woman. "What's your name?" he asked. She struggled to answer. "Viv." Her voice disappeared beneath another cough. "It's okay," Caleb said calmly. "Don't try to talk." A sharp hiss escaped from beneath the hood. Someone several feet away yelled, "Back up! The engine could catch!" The small crowd instinctively stepped farther away. Caleb didn't. He circled to the passenger side, where the impact had been lighter. The door resisted before finally giving way with a painful groan. Broken glass covered the seat. He carefully climbed halfway inside. "Listen to me," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I'm going to help you out, but I need you to stay with me." She blinked once. That was enough. The seat belt had locked tightly. He searched frantically until another bystander reached through the window with a rescue knife from an emergency kit. "Here." Caleb caught it. One clean cut. The belt snapped free. Now came the difficult part. Her left leg was trapped beneath the crushed dashboard. He braced himself against the doorframe, pushed with every ounce of strength he had, and created just enough space for her to slide several inches. She cried out in pain. "I'm sorry," Caleb whispered. "I know. Just one more second." Together with the other driver, he eased her carefully out of the vehicle moments before firefighters arrived. The paramedics rushed in immediately, taking over with practiced precision. One of them stopped Caleb before he walked away. "Sir, are you family?" "No. You saved her life." Caleb looked toward the stretcher where the injured woman disappeared into the ambulance. "I just happened to be here." The paramedic gave him a long look. "No," he said quietly. "A lot of people were here." Caleb didn't know how to answer that. His phone vibrated. 8:36 a.m. 3 missed calls. 1 voicemail. The interview. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. Months of preparation had vanished in the space of 15 unexpected minutes. He could still drive there. He could invent an excuse. Maybe they'd understand. Then he noticed blood smeared across the sleeve of his navy jacket, and tiny fragments of safety glass still clinging to his trousers. He let out a slow breath. Some opportunities arrived exactly once. Others revealed who you were when no one was watching. Caleb climbed back into his truck, placed both hands on the steering wheel, and stared silently through the windshield. For the first time that morning, he wasn't thinking about the interview. He was wondering whether the woman in the ambulance would survive. The emergency vehicles disappeared into the distance, their sirens fading beneath the ordinary sounds of the city beginning another workday. For everyone else, traffic slowly returned to normal. For Caleb Holloway, nothing about the morning felt normal anymore. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel for a few seconds before finally starting the truck. The dashboard clock read 8:52 a.m. There was no point rushing to the interview now. Even if the company agreed to see him, he looked like a man who had crawled through broken glass, which, in a way, he had. He drove toward a quiet gas station, parked beside an air pump, and stepped out. The sleeve of his navy jacket was streaked with dried blood. Tiny shards of glass still sparkled on the fabric whenever sunlight caught them. Inside the restroom, he rinsed his hands over and over, watching pink water swirl into the drain. Not my blood. The thought should have comforted him. Instead, it reminded him that somewhere across town, a woman he had never met was lying in an emergency room fighting through injuries he could only imagine. His phone buzzed again. This time it was an email. Thank you for your interest. Unfortunately, after today's missed interview. Caleb stopped reading. He slipped the phone back into his pocket before reaching the final sentence. There was nothing left to negotiate. Outside, he folded his jacket across the passenger seat and drove home through neighborhoods he had come to know far too well during months of unemployment. Every strip mall, every warehouse, every office building represented another application, another polite rejection, another promise to Nora that tomorrow might be different. When he opened the front door, the house greeted him with silence. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to sit without making a plan. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked steadily. Bills remained stacked beside the coffee maker. Nora's cereal bowl still rested in the sink from breakfast. His eyes drifted toward the folded note she had written that morning. He unfolded it once more. No matter what happens today, you're already the bravest dad I know. A quiet laugh escaped him. Your timing is unbelievable, kid. By early afternoon, he forced himself back into motion. Self-pity had never paid a bill. He changed into an old flannel shirt, updated his resume with 2 minor certifications he had recently completed online, and submitted applications to 3 companies that were offering salaries well below what he had earned before. Each application felt less like hope and more like responsibility. Just before school dismissal, Caleb picked Nora up as usual. She climbed into the truck, buckled her seat belt, and immediately looked at him. So, did they love you? He hesitated just long enough for her to notice. The interview didn't happen. She frowned. What do you mean? I never made it there. He explained the accident without exaggeration, leaving out the fear, the blood, and the moments when he thought the damaged car might ignite. Nora listened without interrupting. When he finished, she stared quietly through the windshield for several seconds. Finally, she asked only one question. Is the lady going to be okay? I honestly don't know. She nodded slowly. I'm glad you stopped. Caleb looked at her. Even if it costs me the job? She turned toward him with the kind of certainty that only children sometimes possess. Dad, if you hadn't stopped, you wouldn't be the person who deserved that job. Her words settled over the cab in complete silence. Across the city, in a private hospital room, the injured woman opened her eyes as doctors completed another examination. Ignoring the pain in her shoulder, she looked at the nurse beside her. The man, she whispered. The one who pulled me out. The nurse smiled gently. We're still trying to identify him. The woman closed her eyes again. Please don't stop looking. Neither of them realized that the search had already begun to change 2 lives in ways either could yet imagine. 7 days passed with the quiet, relentless rhythm that often follows disappointment. Every morning, Caleb Holloway packed Nora's lunch, drove her to school, searched job boards, and sent out applications that seemed to disappear into invisible piles with hundreds of others. Every evening, he crossed another day off the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator, telling himself that persistence counted for something, even when results refused to appear. The accident became a memory he rarely mentioned. Not because he regretted stopping. Because he believed it belonged to the woman who had survived, not to him. Late Friday morning, while replacing a loose fence board behind the townhouse for a neighbor who paid him in cash, his phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unfamiliar business number. Mr. Holloway? A calm voice asked. Yes. My name is Andrea. I'm calling from Prescott Biotechnologies. We'd like to invite you to visit our headquarters this afternoon regarding your missed interview. Caleb frowned. I assumed that opportunity was gone. There are a few matters we'd like to discuss in person. The call ended without further explanation. By 2 o'clock, Caleb found himself standing outside a sleek glass building overlooking the Potomac River. Employees hurried through revolving doors carrying laptops and coffee cups, moving with the confidence of people who belonged there. Caleb adjusted the same navy suit he had cleaned as best he could after the accident. The faint tear near one sleeve remained almost invisible unless someone looked closely. Inside, a receptionist greeted him warmly. "Mr. Holloway? Someone is expecting you." Instead of leading him toward an interview room, she escorted him to a private executive floor. That immediately felt wrong. "I think there's been a mistake," Caleb said. She simply smiled. The person waiting insisted. The conference room overlooked the city skyline. Caleb had barely taken in the view when the door opened. The woman who stepped inside wore a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse. Her left arm rested in a medical sling, and a thin healing cut traced her temple. For a moment neither of them spoke. Recognition arrived first in her eyes. Then in his. "You," Caleb said softly. She smiled with visible emotion. "I've been trying to find you all week." Before he could respond, she extended her uninjured hand. "My name is Vivian Prescott." Caleb shook it politely. "It's good to see you're recovering." She studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "You probably don't know this," she said, "but I'm also the CEO of this company." The words landed quietly, but Caleb's expression hardly changed. What surprised Vivian wasn't that he had saved her life. It was that, after learning who she was, the first thing he asked wasn't about the missed interview. Instead, he looked at the sling on her arm and said with genuine relief, "So the doctors think you're going to make a full recovery?" Vivian Prescott gestured toward the chair across from her, but Caleb remained standing for another moment, as if trying to understand why fate had brought them into the same room twice in 1 week. "I'm relieved you're alive," he said simply. "I owe that to you." "I don't think you owe me anything." A faint smile crossed Vivian's face. "Most people would disagree. Most people weren't there." She studied him carefully before sitting down. Every movement reminded her that several ribs were still healing. "Please," she said. "Sit." Caleb took the chair opposite her. For a few seconds neither spoke. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Potomac shimmered beneath the afternoon sun, but inside the room the silence carried far more weight than the view. Vivian finally broke it. "I asked our security team to identify the man who pulled me out of that car. It wasn't easy. The police report listed several witnesses, but nobody knew your name until one of the paramedics remembered your truck." Caleb gave a small nod. "I wasn't trying to disappear." "I know. You had more important things to focus on." Vivian leaned forward. "Actually, finding you became one of those important things." She opened a folder lying on the table. Inside was his resume. "I recognized your name immediately." Caleb glanced at the document. "So, this wasn't really about rescheduling my interview?" "No." She closed the folder. "It's about making something right." Caleb already knew where the conversation was heading, and he felt a quiet discomfort settle into his chest. "You missed an opportunity because you chose to save my life," Vivian continued. "I don't believe that's something you should be punished for." "I don't either." Relief briefly appeared on her face. Until he continued. "But I also don't think it should earn me special treatment." Her expression changed. "I'm not talking about charity. It would still be because of what happened on the highway. You demonstrated character. I demonstrated what anyone should do." Vivian almost laughed. "You've met enough people to know that's not true." Caleb couldn't argue with that. Instead, he folded his hands together. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "If someone else had missed that interview for a different reason, taking care of a sick parent, helping a neighbor during an emergency, or staying with their child in the hospital, would they be sitting in this room?" Vivian didn't answer immediately. The silence itself became an answer. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's the problem." She looked down at the resume again. "You were one of the strongest candidates before any of this happened. Then let that be enough. You never had the chance to prove it. Then give me the same chance everyone else gets." Vivian slowly leaned back. "You really mean that?" "I do." "If I offered you the position today, would you refuse?" Caleb took a long breath. He thought about the overdue utility bill tucked into a kitchen drawer. He thought about Nora's growing feet and the sneakers she'd need before winter. He thought about the savings account that was nearly empty. Every practical part of him wanted to say yes. Instead, he answered with painful honesty. If I accepted the job because I saved you, then saving you would stop being something I did because it was right. Vivian stared at him, almost searching for some hidden pride beneath the words. She found none. Only conviction. For the first time in years, she felt unexpectedly uncertain about one of her own decisions. As CEO, she had spent countless hours discussing fairness, ethics, and corporate values in boardrooms filled with polished presentations and carefully chosen language. Yet this unemployed father had reduced the entire discussion to one impossible question. Would the company still hire him if he had never met its CEO? If the answer was no, then why should it now? Vivian quietly closed the folder. I thought bringing you here would settle my conscience. Caleb smiled gently. Maybe it wasn't your conscience that needed settling. A soft knock interrupted them. Andrea stepped inside. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Vivian nodded without taking her eyes off Caleb. I'll be there. After the door closed again, Caleb stood and buttoned his jacket. I appreciate you inviting me. You're leaving? There isn't anything else to decide today. He offered his hand. Vivian stood and shook it. This conversation isn't over. I don't think it is either. As Caleb walked out of the executive office, he believed he had just closed the door on the easiest opportunity of his life. Vivian watched him disappear down the hallway. For the first time since becoming CEO, she entered a board meeting carrying a question no quarterly report had ever forced her to confront. What if a company's greatest test of integrity wasn't how it rewarded extraordinary people, but how fairly it treated ordinary ones? Vivian Prescott remained in the conference room long after Caleb's footsteps had faded into the hallway. His resume still lay unopened on the table. For the first time since it had been printed, it felt almost irrelevant. The board meeting began exactly on schedule. Financial forecasts filled the screen. Market expansion. Regulatory updates. Hiring projections. Normally, Vivian moved through these discussions with calm precision, but her attention kept drifting back to one sentence Caleb had spoken. Would someone else be sitting in this room? When the presentation reached executive hiring, one of the board members glanced toward her. We still have an opening for Director of Regional Operations. We do, Vivian replied. Have you selected a replacement candidate? She paused. Not yet. Another director leaned forward. I heard the applicant who missed his interview was the man who rescued you. The room grew noticeably quieter. That's correct, Vivian answered. Well, another executive said with an easy smile, that seems like an obvious decision. Hire him. Several people nodded. It sounded reasonable. Even generous. Vivian surprised them all. No. The room fell silent. No, one director repeated. I won't hire someone because he saved my life. But surely exceptions exist. They do, Vivian answered evenly. When they're fair to everyone. Someone frowned. You're overthinking this. Maybe. She folded her hands. But if I make one exception because I feel grateful, every employee in this company has the right to question whether merit actually matters. No one spoke for several moments. The discussion moved on, but Vivian noticed something unsettling. Not a single person had asked whether Caleb was the best candidate. Only whether he deserved gratitude. Across town, Caleb loaded boxes into a delivery van for a temporary logistics contractor who had called that morning. The work lasted only 2 weeks. The pay was modest. There were no benefits. He accepted without hesitation. By late afternoon, sweat soaked through the back of his work shirt as he helped unload medical supplies at a neighborhood clinic. His supervisor, a broad-shouldered man named Luis, watched him organize the pallets with quiet efficiency. You've done warehouse management before? For a long time. Luis laughed. I can tell. Most new guys create twice as much work. Caleb smiled. I've made enough mistakes over the years to recognize them early. It wasn't glamorous work. No corner office. No polished conference table overlooking the river. Just careful planning, heavy lifting, and making sure every shipment reached the right place. Oddly enough, the familiar rhythm steadied him. That evening, Nora sat at the kitchen counter finishing math homework while Caleb cooked spaghetti. She looked up from her notebook. Did you get the job? I got a job. Her face brightened. Really? He nodded. Temporary. Is that good? It's honest work. She smiled. Then I guess it's a good start. As they ate dinner, neither mentioned Prescott Biotechnologies. Neither mentioned the interview. Neither mentioned the woman whose life had quietly become connected to theirs. Miles away, Vivian stood alone in the company's archive room. Rows of hiring files stretched across metal shelves. She pulled several folders from previous recruitment cycles and began reading. One application after another. Strong candidates rejected for narrow reasons. Interviews missed because of family emergencies. Military spouses forced to relocate. Applicants caring for aging parents. Excellent people who never received a second chance, not because they lacked ability, but because the hiring process had no room for life's unpredictability. She wasn't looking for Caleb anymore. She was looking for something far more uncomfortable. Evidence that the system she had defended for years had quietly confused consistency with fairness. And for the first time since becoming CEO, she wondered whether changing a company required far more courage than leading one. 3 weeks later, Caleb no longer checked his email every hour. Hope had quietly changed its shape. Instead of waiting for one perfect opportunity, he focused on doing each day's work well enough to earn another tomorrow. The temporary logistics contract had turned into longer assignments. Louise trusted him to coordinate deliveries between clinics across Northern Virginia, solving scheduling conflicts before they became expensive mistakes. One rainy Tuesday morning, a shipment of temperature-sensitive medication was delayed after a delivery truck broke down outside the city. Phones began ringing. Nurses were waiting. Patients were already arriving. While others argued over responsibility, Caleb spread a highway map across the dispatch desk and began redirecting vehicles, borrowing and used refrigerated space from another supplier, and reorganizing every route by hand. Within 90 minutes, every clinic received its shipment. No celebration followed. Just relieved staff returning to work. Louise walked over and clapped him on the shoulder. You know, he said, I've interviewed people with impressive resumes who would have panicked today. Caleb smiled tiredly. Experience teaches you that problems don't care whose fault they are. That afternoon, Louise called him into the office. I can't offer executive salaries, he admitted, but I can offer something permanent. He slid an employment agreement across the desk. Operations supervisor. Steady income. Health insurance. A future that finally looked predictable again. Caleb looked at the contract for a long moment before signing it. Not because it was his dream. Because it was earned. At nearly the same hour across town, Vivian Prescott stood before her executive leadership team. A new proposal filled the screen behind her. Candidate Review Initiative. No names. No personal connections. No executive recommendations. Any applicant whose hiring process had been interrupted by documented emergencies would receive a standardized second evaluation conducted by an independent panel. The panel would never know why the candidate had been reconsidered, only whether their qualifications met the role. One executive raised an eyebrow. This policy came from what happened to you, didn't it? Vivian answered without hesitation. It came from realizing our process wasn't as fair as I believed. Another executive asked. And what about the man who rescued you? Vivian closed the presentation remote and met every eye around the table. He'll be treated exactly like everyone else. There was no applause. Only thoughtful silence. For Vivian, that silence felt more meaningful than agreement. Because this wasn't about repaying a debt anymore. It was about refusing to let gratitude become favoritism. As rain tapped softly against the boardroom windows, she realized Caleb had given her something far greater than her life back. Without ever intending to, he had forced her to become the kind of leader she had always believed she already was. Winter arrived quietly. The maple tree outside Caleb Holloway's townhouse had long since surrendered its last leaves, and the morning air carried the sharp bite that made every breath visible. Life had not become extraordinary. It had simply become steady. Every weekday before sunrise, Caleb unlocked the warehouse doors, reviewed delivery schedules, and walked the loading floor with a clipboard tucked beneath his arm. His promotion to operations supervisor had brought structure back into his life, but not luxury. The paycheck covered the mortgage payments on time, the refrigerator stayed full, and Nora no longer heard whispered conversations about overdue bills after she had gone to bed. For Caleb, that was enough. One afternoon, while reviewing inventory reports, his office phone rang. "Mr. Holloway? This is Caleb. My name is Andrea from Prescott Biotechnologies." He recognized the name immediately. "I hope Ms. Prescott is doing well." "She's recovering very well. Actually, I'm calling because our company recently completed a new candidate review process. Your previous application qualified under that policy." Caleb remained silent. "We'd like to invite you to participate in a new interview." He leaned back in his chair. "I appreciate the opportunity. You don't sound surprised. I suppose I learned not to expect life to repeat itself." Andrea smiled softly on the other end of the line. "This won't be the same interview." After hanging up, Caleb stared through the office window toward the loading dock below. Forklifts moved between pallets. Drivers joked while securing cargo. For the first time in months, he realized he wasn't chasing a rescue from his current life. He already had a life worth respecting. That evening he told Nora about the invitation while washing dinner dishes. "So," she asked, drying a plate beside him, "are you going?" "I think I should. Do you want the job?" Caleb considered the question more carefully than he expected. "I want to know whether I earn it." Nora nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. The interview took place the following week. This time there was no executive conference room. No private elevator. No special welcome. Caleb entered the same reception area as every other candidate, received a visitor badge, completed a written assessment, and spent nearly 3 hours rotating through interviews with managers from departments he had never met. No one mentioned the highway. No one mentioned Vivian. One interviewer challenged his decisions during a logistics case study. Another questioned how he handled employee conflict. A third asked why he had accepted a lower-paying supervisor position instead of waiting for something more prestigious. "Because responsibility doesn't pause while pride catches up," Caleb answered. When the final interview ended, he thanked the panel and walked out believing he had performed honestly. Nothing more. Nothing less. 2 days later, Vivian requested a summary from the Independent Review Committee. She did not attend the meeting. She did not cast a vote. She simply opened the sealed evaluation after Human Resources had finalized every score. Caleb Holloway ranked first among all remaining candidates. Not because anyone knew what he had done on a cold October morning. Not because the CEO had intervened. Because every evaluator, working independently, had reached the same conclusion. He possessed the strongest combination of leadership, operational judgment, and practical experience. Vivian set the report down and allowed herself a quiet smile. Weeks earlier, gratitude had tempted her to hand Caleb an opportunity. Now she felt something entirely different. Relief. The process had spoken before she ever had the chance to. When Caleb received the official offer, he read it twice before calling Nora into the living room. She looked at the company logo and then at her father. "Did you get it?" He nodded slowly. "This time, I know why." He wasn't smiling because the offer came from a prestigious company. He was smiling because there would never be a question hanging over it. No hidden favor. No unpaid debt. No special treatment. only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the hardest choice he had made on an ordinary October morning had never guaranteed him success. It had simply allowed him to keep becoming the man his daughter already believed he was. Spring arrived with the kind of gentle mornings that made the world feel as though it had quietly forgiven winter. From his office window at Prescott Biotechnologies, Caleb Holloway watched employees cross the courtyard carrying coffee cups, laptops, and conversations that would soon become another ordinary workday. He had been with the company for 4 months. Long enough to know people's names. Long enough to earn their trust. Not long enough to forget how unexpectedly he had arrived there. His leadership style surprised many of his team. He rarely raised his voice. He listened before giving instructions. And whenever a problem surfaced, his first question was never, "Who's responsible?" It was, "What do we need to fix?" One afternoon, Human Resources invited several local middle school students to tour the company's operations center as part of a career exploration program. Among them was Nora. She walked through the building with curious eyes, trying very hard not to look too impressed that this was where her father now worked. Caleb met the group near the logistics control room. "Dad!" Professional composure disappeared instantly as Nora ran over and hugged him. The visiting students smiled. One of them whispered, "Your dad works here?" She nodded proudly. "Yeah. And he's your boss?" Another joked. "No," Caleb laughed. "Just your tour guide today." After showing the students how shipments were tracked across the country, the group entered the company's central atrium. Sunlight poured through the glass ceiling onto a wall displaying the organization's leadership principles. Most visitors barely glanced at it. Nora stopped. One sentence had recently been added beneath the company's mission statement. "Fairness gives every person the chance to be known for what they can do, not for who they know or what they owe." She read it twice. Then quietly looked toward Vivian Prescott, who had joined the tour near the back of the room. Vivian noticed the glance and walked over. "What do you think?" she asked. Nora smiled. "I think my dad would like that." Vivian's eyes shifted toward Caleb. "He already does." There was no mention of the accident. No audience waiting to applaud. No ceremony celebrating what had happened months earlier. The most important part of that story had never been the rescue itself. It had been every decision that followed. As the students prepared to leave, Nora slipped her hand into her father's. "You know what?" "What?" "I used to think being brave meant doing one really big thing." Caleb looked down at her. "And now? I think it's doing the right thing, even after nobody's watching anymore." For a moment, he couldn't answer. Because she had understood the lesson more completely than he ever could have explained it. Across the atrium, Vivian watched them walk toward the exit together. Months ago, she believed gratitude meant repaying a debt. Now she understood that real gratitude could demand something much harder. It could require changing yourself. As father and daughter stepped into the warm afternoon sunlight, Caleb reached into his jacket pocket and felt a folded piece of paper that had remained there since the day of the interview. The edges were worn now. The handwriting slightly faded. He unfolded it one more time. "No matter what happens today, you're already the bravest dad I know." He smiled exactly as he had that October morning. The difference was that he no longer wondered whether he had lived up to those words. He knew the answer had never depended on getting a job, meeting a CEO, or changing his circumstances. The greatest legacy he could ever leave Nora wasn't the position he held or the salary he earned. It was showing her, day after ordinary day, that character is not proven by the rewards life gives us. It is revealed by the choices we make when no reward is guaranteed.